The bluntness of that moment cannot be ignored, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Inside that press conference, when Art Rooney was asked directly whether Aaron Rodgers was someone he saw coming back, the answer landed with real weight. The response made it clear that Rodgers was Mike Tomlin's guy, and with Tomlin no longer part of the equation, the chances of Rodgers returning to the Pittsburgh Steelers are slim to none. It wasn't dressed up, it wasn't softened, and it wasn't accidental. It was direct, necessary, and honest. The kind of answer that tells you an organizational door is quietly closing. And once that door closes, the real question crashes in immediately. Where does this franchise go from here at quarterback? That's the uncomfortable cycle the Steelers are staring at right now. There is no easy transition, no obvious bridge, and no safety net waiting underneath. You are a team that must find a quarterback, but the paths in front of you are all uncertain. Do you bring in another veteran, knowing that it might only delay the inevitable? Do you allow Mason Rudolph and Will Howard to battle it out and see if something real emerges? Or do you look outside the building for a short-term answer while accepting that this season could be painful? Complicating matters even more is the college landscape. Dante Moore deciding to return to the NCAA erased one of the fallback options entirely. That ripple effect pushes other quarterbacks up boards, including Ty Simpson, who now appears destined to be drafted by the New York Jets. What that means for Pittsburgh is simple and harsh. Even the backup plans are disappearing. When you start talking about 2026, this is already a bad place to be for a franchise that prides itself on stability. Right now, the internal debate seems to revolve around uncomfortable choices. One possibility is creating a competition between Mason Rudolph and Will Howard. Another is trying to lure Malik Willis to Pittsburgh as a temporary starter, someone who can hold the position while the roster continues to be built. The evaluation of the upcoming quarterback class matters here, and the reality is that the top end of that list is not inspiring confidence. Fernando Mendoza is not accessible. Ty Simpson is viewed negatively in terms of fit and quality. Trinidad Chambliss is the intriguing name, but even there, the expectation is that quarterback-hungry teams will reach, pushing him into first-round territory whether he truly belongs there or not. That's the danger zone for the Steelers. Reaching for a quarterback simply because you feel cornered is how franchises set themselves back years. The smarter, but harder, approach is patience combined with aggression only when the right opportunity appears. If there were a quarterback available who could realistically start for 3 years with this team, the answer would be simple: go get him. The problem is that no such clear option exists right now. That's why the idea of taking a one-year chance on a free agent keeps surfacing, even if it means accepting that the team might struggle. Art Rooney's comments about not liking the word rebuilding matter here. He acknowledged something important. It is okay to be bad sometimes. Being bad does not mean the Pittsburgh Steelers are ruined forever. That mindset shift is crucial, because pretending everything is fine when it isn't only creates panic decisions. The alternative options are not appealing either. Do you really want a 43-year-old quarterback returning? Someone who doesn't know the head coach and might not even be fully invested? Or is it better to look inward and see what you actually have? That's where Will Howard's name starts to hover in the background. His stock could rise simply because of circumstance, not because anyone is fully convinced he is the long-term answer. Mason Rudolph, at least based on the current thinking, is not viewed as the 2026 starter. Will Howard could be, even if doubts remain. Everything depends on direction, who is hired, what philosophy they bring. If someone like Brian Flores enters the picture, suddenly connections matter. Maybe that opens the door to a name like Carson Wentz. If a different coach comes in, maybe Trey Lance gets an opportunity in Pittsburgh. Other teams and backups get mentioned almost out of frustration, because clarity simply doesn't exist yet. One thing, however, does feel clear. Art Rooney has to make it abundantly clear to whoever he hires that the quarterback situation is understood. There cannot be pressure that says, if you fail this year, it's over. That kind of pressure forces bad decisions. It leads to reaching on quarterbacks and drafts where reaching makes no sense. The smarter path is to continue building the team, put it in the best possible position, and then find your quarterback when the moment is right. That was the approach before Mike Tomlin left, and changing that philosophy now would only invite chaos. This is where the Steelers stand, facing uncertainty, temptation, and the risk of impatience all at once. The decisions made here won't just affect next season, they will shape the identity of the franchise moving forward. What do you think the Steelers should do at quarterback, given this situation? And that's why this moment feels so delicate, because once you accept that there is no clean solution, every move becomes about restraint as much as action. The Steelers are standing at a crossroads where the worst mistake would be pretending certainty exists when it doesn't. The temptation to force an answer at quarterback is real, especially for a franchise that hates instability. But forcing it now could create a deeper hole that lasts far beyond a single season.
Look at how narrow the realistic paths actually are. Bringing in a veteran quarterback sounds comforting on the surface, but when you strip it down, most of those options are temporary by definition. You are not talking about a long-term face of the franchise, you are talking about placeholders. That is why names like Malik Willis even enter the conversation. Not because anyone is convinced he is the answer, but because he represents time. Time to evaluate, time to build, time to avoid panic. And time, right now, might be the most valuable asset this organization has. The internal options tell a similar story. Mason Rudolph is not being positioned as the future starter in 2026, and that alone says a lot. If the building truly believed in him as the answer, the conversation would sound very different. Will Howard, on the other hand, exists in this strange space where opportunity could inflate perception. His name keeps surfacing not because confidence is overwhelming, but because the field around him is thinning. When options disappear, curiosity grows. That doesn't automatically mean belief, and that distinction matters. The draft landscape only amplifies the risk. With Dante Moore returning to college and Ty Simpson effectively removed from realistic consideration, the quarterback board becomes distorted. Trinidad Chambliss stands out, but even that comes with a warning label. When teams are desperate, quarterbacks rise not because they are elite, but because the position demands urgency. That is how reaches happen. That is how front offices talk themselves into players they would have graded differently under calmer circumstances. For a team like Pittsburgh, built on discipline and long-term thinking, that is a dangerous game. This is where Art Rooney's mindset quietly becomes the anchor. His acknowledgement that being bad sometimes is acceptable is not weakness, it's clarity. It creates breathing room. It tells a future head coach that development matters more than optics. It removes the ticking clock that leads to reckless decisions. Without that clarity, the next hire could feel trapped into chasing a quarterback too early, just to show progress, just to survive. And then there's the coaching angle itself. Depending on who comes in, the quarterback conversation shifts dramatically. A coach with prior connections, like Brian Flores, naturally brings a different network into play. Suddenly, names like Carson Wentz enter the discussion, not as saviors, but as functional bridges. A different hire could see potential in Trey Lance, viewing Pittsburgh as a reset environment rather than a final stop. None of these ideas scream certainty, but they all point back to the same truth. Flexibility matters more than commitment right now. What absolutely cannot happen is a philosophical reset built on fear. Reaching for a quarterback in a draft that does not demand it would undermine everything the Steelers have tried to preserve. It would turn patience into panic and structure into reaction. The roster still needs to be built, stabilized, and put into a position where a young quarterback, when he finally arrives, is not asked to save everything on day one. This is the uncomfortable chapter that many fan bases never survive, but Pittsburgh has always prided itself on not chasing trends or headlines. The organization believed in this measured approach before Mike Tomlin left, and abandoning it now would only compound the instability already created by change. Consistency in philosophy, even during uncertainty, is what separates a temporary downturn from a prolonged collapse. So now the Steelers wait, evaluate, and resist the noise. Every rumor, every name floated, every speculative path should be filtered through one simple question. Does this move help us long-term, or does it just make us feel better right now? The answer to that question will define the next era of Steelers football. And even beyond the names and scenarios already discussed, what makes this situation heavier is the silence around certainty. There is no internal leak suggesting the Steelers have quietly identified their guy. There's no strong signal that a specific veteran is being targeted as the clear bridge. Instead, everything points to a front office that understands how fragile this moment is and how easily one rushed decision could undo years of roster construction. The danger here is not just missing on a quarterback. The real danger is misaligning timelines. If the Steelers rush to acquire a quarterback who doesn't truly fit the long-term vision, they risk wasting prime years of other players on the roster. That's how frustration spreads. That's how locker rooms lose patience. And that's how a single mistake at quarterback becomes a chain reaction across the entire organization. This is why the idea of stinking for a year keeps surfacing, even if nobody wants to say it out loud. Accepting a down season is not surrender, it's strategy, if it's done intentionally. It allows the front office to keep building the team without forcing the quarterback position to carry unrealistic expectations. It also sends a message that when the Steelers finally do move aggressively for a quarterback, it will be because the situation demands it, not because panic pushed them there. Another layer to this is how the next quarterback will be judged. Whoever steps into this role will be compared, fairly or not, to stability that no longer exists. That's a tough environment for any young player or short-term veteran, which is why the Steelers must be careful not to frame the next option as a savior. The moment you sell hope instead of process, the margin for error disappears. Internally, that means the coaching hire and the quarterback decision cannot be separated. The philosophy of the head coach will shape how patient the organization truly is. A coach who understands development and accepts incremental progress aligns perfectly with Rooney's comments. A coach who feels pressure to win immediately could quietly push the franchise toward shortcuts. And shortcuts, historically, are where this league punishes teams the most. What makes this all so fascinating is that, for once, the Steelers are being forced to operate without a safety blanket. No obvious starter, no clean draft solution, no veteran who clearly elevates the roster. That discomfort might actually be the catalyst for smarter decision-making, if they lean into it instead of fighting it. So as this offseason unfolds, every move, or lack of a move, should be viewed through that lens. Silence might be intentional, patience might be progress, and confusion on the outside does not automatically mean chaos on the inside. And this is where the emotional split among Steelers fans really starts to show, because patience sounds good in theory, but it feels brutal in real time. This fan base is not conditioned to accept drifting seasons or vague futures. Decades of competitiveness have built an expectation that every year matters, that every Sunday carries weight. That's exactly why this moment is so dangerous, because the pressure doesn't just exist inside the building, it lives outside of it too. From the organization's perspective, though, the math is cold. Forcing a quarterback into a flawed situation rarely ends well. If the Steelers rush now, they don't just risk missing on the player, they risk damaging him before he ever has a chance. A young quarterback walking into instability, constant scrutiny, and a fan base desperate for answers is not being set up to succeed. That's not development, that's survival mode. This is also why the idea of continuity keeps coming back. Not continuity at quarterback, because that doesn't exist right now, but continuity in philosophy. The Steelers have always believed in building the roster first, in letting the quarterback be the final piece instead of the foundation. Deviating from that identity just because the situation feels uncomfortable would be a betrayal of what has kept the franchise relevant for so long. The irony is that doing nothing flashy might actually be the hardest move of all. No splashy signing, no bold draft reach. Just steady, sometimes boring decisions that don't dominate headlines but quietly protect the future. That approach requires confidence from ownership, patience from fans, and discipline from the front office. And those three things don't always align easily. What happens next will tell us a lot about who the Steelers really are in this new era. Whether they trust their process enough to endure discomfort, or whether they blink and chase a short-term fix. The quarterback position will eventually be solved, but how they get there matters just as much as who the final answer is. Because once that quarterback finally arrives, whether through the draft or another unexpected path, the environment around him will determine everything. And right now, the Steelers are deciding whether that environment will be built on desperation or preparation. And when you zoom out even further, what's happening right now feels less like a single offseason dilemma and more like a stress test of the Steelers' identity. This franchise has always believed it knows who it is, even when the league around it shifts. But moments like this challenge that belief, because the easy answers are gone. There's no Hall of Fame quarterback stepping in. There's no obvious draft class to save the day. There's only judgment, timing, and restraint. What's interesting is how much this situation exposes the difference between solving a problem and managing one. The Steelers may not be able to solve the quarterback problem immediately, but they can manage it intelligently. That means accepting uncertainty without letting it spiral into chaos. It means understanding that not every season is about contention, but every season is about direction. Lose that, and everything else unravels. The front office now has to weigh optics against reality. A splashy move might buy short-term goodwill, but it could cost long-term stability. A quiet offseason might frustrate fans, but it could preserve flexibility. That balance is incredibly hard to maintain, especially in a market where every move is dissected and every non-move is criticized just as harshly. And that's why this next stretch matters so much. Not just who they sign or who they draft, but how they explain it. Transparency, even when the message isn't what fans want to hear, builds trust. If the Steelers truly believe the best path forward is patience, then they have to own that publicly and stick to it privately. Wavering would be worse than choosing either extreme. The quarterback who eventually becomes the answer will arrive into a story that's being written right now. He'll inherit the consequences of these decisions, good or bad.